Hi everyone, thank you for joining us for our second video status update for Nexus. I'm Alan Landau, and once again I'm joined by Andrew Bertino. To get everyone up to speed as far as what Nexus is, it is a third-person action-adventure game that follows Chris Reynolds as he searches to find his father, who is lost in some underground caves and temple environments. He will come upon an ancient alien power that gives him the ability to manipulate mass, light, and gravity. This week, we're going to go into our second shell, show you around, and then go over our programming and art updates for the week. So as you can see, we are currently located at the end of the first shell right now, and Chris, who right now is being portrayed by our MERC model, this is an in-game model that we will be using but is not our final primary character, is basically stuck with the task of getting through this wall down here to get to the next section. So he basically is given this boulder right here, and Bertino is going to show off that we can just use one of our powers, or we can push directly onto the rock, and once we do that, it will go through and break the wall underneath so we can enter into the second area. Now the second area is a slight departure from the first. The first is mainly a cave. It's relatively confined, things to that nature. This one starts bringing into these native temple feel. So you can see there's different textures on the walls. There's these columns that are present. It just feels a lot more man-made than the previous section. As you can see, our artists have done a fantastic job this week in really giving a sense of wonder and mystery as far as what's going on in the cave world here. As you can see from this mysterious tube that kind of goes through this middle section. We've also worked on some other things like plants and vegetation in the level, as well as some materials on the tube that you can see here. The plant things that we've worked on specifically this week are basically giving it some native animations, and in the following week we're going to be working on having them procedurally react to player interactions. So as the player walks through, the branches will move realistically, things like that, instead of just swaying all the time. So as we walk through this level, you can see that we've set up kind of a dramatic moment here in this central chamber. You can see more of these tubes that we've created, and it also it provides basically a framing for this very center part, which is, in effect, the Nexus power. In the fiction of the game, in the first section, you won't have any powers, so you'll have to traverse through them, or through the first section, just as a normal explorer would, jumping, climbing, walking, running. But in this second section, you're going to be exposed to this power and actually have the powers that we've shown both in the first and second section actually come alive and be able to be used. So Andrew's going to walk up this backwards to show a small little Kismet event that we're playing with, which is basically a disappearing walkway. So we're probably going to be utilizing this actually as you walk up to the power, but it's a nice little effect and one that we just wanted to show off right there. So now that we've gotten the power in the fiction of the game, we're going to go down here and show you what effectively you can do with it. Here you see our first attempt, our first pass at some enemy AI. And the enemy AI actually is able to basically go on patrol from point to point that we set up using UDK's pathfinding nodes. And then if the player comes within range, it's actually able to realize that the player is around it, and it basically is just aware of the player. And then if you come too close to it, it will start attacking, and it'll basically charge up and then do a rush towards you. Now, this seems a little bit out of place for our current model that's in there, which is a robot, but eventually that will be changed out to a BOAR character, so that those animations and attacks fit. We also have a secondary state of when you actually get really close to the character, it does kind of a swiping attack. Now as we move over to this other section, you can see that we've set up some physics objects over here. And Andrew's showing off some of the lighting effects that we've put in for powers. This first one that he's showing off is called, we're tentatively calling it the Sticky Light Glob. It is able to cast dynamic shadows both as it moves through the world, as well as stick to any static mesh in the world and cast shadows off of that. You can also see that nice little flicker effect that we have from the light being cast, and all of these options are completely editable. But from everything from what particle effects make up the actual power, to the color of the light, to the brightness of the light, everything pretty much. And I have to personally thank Tim Trisbiak for really doing a very, very good job on the powers for this week. So the next power we're going to show you is going to be the null grav power. And what this effectively does is anything in its range, once it explodes, is basically the gravity of it is converted to 0, and then a small little impulse is put underneath the bottom so they all start to float up. And as we start to develop puzzles that combine the usages of these powers, you can really see some interesting things start to evolve. Like using basically a boulder as both a projectile enemy, as both a projectile weapon, as well as maybe a flashlight of sorts. So you throw sticky light globs on a block, and then blast it up in the air using null grav, and then shoot it at a force, or shoot it down a hallway that you don't know what's coming around the corner. One other thing that I want to point out is this very large statue over here. It weighs, the mass of it in UDK is actually substantially larger. I think we have it set right now to over 9,000. And effectively, if you try and use any forces on it just naturally, it won't actually react to it very well. You can't actually move it. You can tip it over, but that's about it. However, if you cast null gravity on it and then start to move it, you can really see that we've given some heft to these objects to try and get a very visceral feel of moving an object that is light versus moving an object that is very heavy. And it also plays to the effect of heavier things in the world are slower to move, but they also pick up momentum more quickly, and that momentum carries through in its inertia. So it's a very interesting system that we've designed with mass and gravity, and we hope to utilize it in some puzzles that we develop for this section throughout this next week. Now that we've shown you through our second shell, we're going to get into some specific things that the programmers and artists have accomplished this week. One of the main goals this week for the programmers was getting our power systems in. This week they focused on the projectile systems, which are a subclass of our weapons system. These include the gravity grenade, the gravity bomb, and the sticky light glob. Additionally, some programmers worked on integrating some new animations, like the two that you can see here are idle animations for the MERC, of him lighting a cigarette and cracking his knuckles. This is our initial portrait study of Chris, which leads nicely into our initial high poly sculpt of Chris. Here you can see some concepts for the Nexus area that will be the main focal point of our second shell. As I touched on earlier, our initial enemy class will be a BOAR, and here you can see that model UV'd and textured. This slide refers back to the pipe materials that I was speaking of earlier, as well as the advanced UDK setup required in order to get that effect. Here's a rendered image of our MERC model right now, as well as a stylized image. And this is how he appears currently in game with spec maps in place. I want to thank you for tuning in to this week's Nexus video status update, and I hope that you join us again next week to see our continued progress.